Today, we will be talking about the Kartilya ng Katipunan. The Kartilya or the Decalogue is a very important part of the Katipunan. If we remember when we were in high school or the younger years, the Katipunan is not just an organization that was founded to fight for against the Spaniards or the oppressors, but the Katipunan was also built around the teaching of Jose Rizal, which is of course to promote education, promote good values, promote good qualities for the Filipino people. So we can say that the aim of the Katipunan, aside from freedom, is of course they also wanted to create better citizens of our society, or basically the Philippines. So now, what really is the Kartilya ng Katipunan that we will be discussed today? The Kartilya ng Katipunan is this small pamphlet, basically the size of your palm. Something that you can carry. This is given to the members of the Katipunan, particularly to the new ones, those we called neophyte. So it is important to give copies of Kartilya ng Katipunan to those new members and those who are applying to be one, so that they'll know what are the important standards or guidelines of being a Katipunero, not just in observance of decorum during group activities or meetings, but it is there to serve as a guide for them to become better citizens. So it goes beyond their behavior as Katipunan members or as Katipunero. It is also there to serve as a guide, basically to become a better human being in general. Okay, to become a better Filipino in general, even outside being a Katipunan member. The word Kartilya, by the way, comes from the Spanish word Kartilya, which was primer used for grade school during that time. So ginagamit nila ito as babasahin, o yung mga children during that time, they use this as primer for grade school. And like the Kartilyas from the Spaniards, the documents serve as the primary lesson for the members of the Katipunan. The Kartilya of the Katipunan served as the primary lesson for the members of the Katipunan. So let us try first analyze and discuss the content of the Katipunan. I will be talking about the contextual analysis, which is the first one, and then the other analysis will be discussed by my other groupmates. Let me first define contextual analysis, so we would know what should be included in our discussion for today. I will give you a metaphor to explain the meaning and the importance of the understanding the context. For example, you wear green colored eyeglasses. What will the world look to you? What will the world look to you when you wear red glasses? How about yellow? The world is the same. The world is the same. By the way you see it changes because the glasses you wear. So the glasses in here, in this situation, is the context. Because it dictates the background to how people are going to perceive what content the text has. In order for us to not misunderstand the content, we should first set the context. This means that the context is always bigger than the content, because the context will dictate how people will perceive the content. The content analysis will be discussed later by my other groupmates. Going back, so basically, in these primary sources, for example, we cannot judge the person behind the event because we are not there. Basically, yes. Instead, we will discuss what are the factors that causes it, particularly the factors that could have influenced the author in writing the document. First, there are reasons why Filipinos during that time resort to making an organization, in particular, di kataas-taasan, kagalang-galangan, katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan, or simply we call KKK or the Katipunan. The first move towards independence began on July 7, 1892, when the Katipunan was established by Andres Bonifacio. The reason behind this is they believe that the struggle for social change through peaceful reforms resulted in failure. So the group decided to achieve social change by means of gaining independence from Spain. Because during that time, we are experiencing Spanish colonization. And these Katipuneros, or the people behind these, decided to achieve social change by means of gaining independence from Spain through an armed revolution, and in order to achieve this goal, they organized KKK. This was a result of the failure of the reform movement in Spain, in which Filipinos attempt to demand reforms for the Philippines from the Spanish government. Bonifacio, who created the KKK, or the founder of the KKK, saw that the futility of the effort of the Filipino propagandists and organized an underground movement against Spain. Di kataas-taasan, kagalang-galangan, katipunan ng anak ng bayan, or the KKK, was a revolutionary society that espoused independence, freedom for the Philippines through force or arms, just like what I have mentioned. The KKK were to promote education, good values, good qualities for the Filipinos, and not only to fight against the Spaniards, which I have mentioned a while ago. So, what does this reveal to us about the author and most of the Filipinos who organized the group? They are being oppressed too much. Not to mention that the author was a person who lived a life of poverty, and obviously he was there at the time, so he was aware of what was happening in the society. He was aware of the oppression, he was aware of the abuse, of the condition of the Filipinos, especially from the perspective of a person who lived in poverty. Okay, it is a different perspective from Rizal and the others, because basically they live a better life than him, or the author. And some were a member of the high-ups in the society, elite, for an instance. It is a different perspective when you live at the lower portion of the society. You can see basically the oppression, and the author having lived in a poverty, so the oppression was already there. The hardship was already there. And I am sure nobody wants to be born in poverty and wants to have a life full of whatever we need. So, despite of being in the lowest portion of the society, the author was able to study, and there he realized that if there was going to be independence, then there has to be change in the people. That's why he propagated the Kartilya Ng Katipunan. The author, who's Jacinto, wanted to help achieve Filipino independence from Spain. Just like what I've mentioned, for the new government, imagined by Bonifacio, which is the founder of the Katipunan, which this Kartilya was implemented, wanted to set out the values. The document is needed to be the doctrine and the ideology of the Katipunan. A vision for equitable and morally sound Filipino country is needed to be the vision of the Katipunan. To show that the importance of the ideas of the right and light, or the katwiran and kaliwanagan, the factors that Emilio Jacinto considered in writing the document were to make sure that the member of the society has the equality of a Katipunero. The document also intended to make the Filipinos understand what a real Katipunero is. So the Katipunero follows the said rules. Because early Katipunero or the Filipino during that time believes that changing the way they thought or the Filipino thought and acted was the most important thing to be considered. That's how they live. So given that this book covers moral values, certain norms, principles, guide for all the Katipuneros on the time being of the Spanish colonial, Jacinto also defined the true deity or the kabanalan as charity, love for one another, deeds and speech guided by judicious reason. For an instance, this contains guides and laws that prominent Katipuneros abide. Jacinto pointed out that the Katipunero should be fair and just no matter what race you come from and what gender you have, as well as unfairly treat of women is something that he is against and thus should not be practiced. During that time, these documents were able to help Katipuneros to reflect on themselves. This document was a good source to understand on how the Katipunero lives. Aside from the ill-treatment experiences felt by the Katipuneros under the Spanish rule, there were other influencing factors causing the creation of the Katipunan and the conceptualization of the Kartilya. First, the Enlightenment in Europe or the Age of the Enlightenment. This Age of Enlightenment encourages these Katipuneros to have courage, to use their own reasons to fight against oppressor. So the second one is the French Revolution. French Revolution of the 1789 was the culmination of the High Enlightenment vision of throwing out the old authority to remake society along rational lines. What inspired the French Revolution is the legacy of the Age of Enlightenment, the motto Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, which means liberty, equality, and fraternity. The ideas of Enlightenment and French Revolution inspired the Ilustrado in Europe and in the island. These two events in the globe encouraged the Filipinos, particularly the Katipuneros, to take up a stand for reforms and later independence. Books from Europe easily reached the Philippines through the Suez Canal, and thus these lead to the spread of the idea of the liberty, equality, and fraternity. The third factor that influences the creation of the Kartilya and the Katipunan is the coming of Masonry in the Philippines. In the year 1856, Freemasonry was introduced in the Philippines. However, native Filipinos were not allowed to join the organization during that time. In the year 1889, Graciano Lopez Jaena organized the Logia Revolution in Barcelona through the support of Grande Oriente Español, hence the root of true Philippine Masonry. As the fraternity grew, the Spanish friars were alarmed and therefore branded all the Masons as insurrectos. Masons were arrested, tortured, exiled. These events became the voice for freedom and democracy. Most of the prominent personalities in the Katipunan were members of the Masonry. The influence of the fraternity to the members were very evident in the document itself. During the Revolution, the Spanish friars believed that the root of all the problems was Masonry and Katipunan. Katipunan is considered by the friars as wad na masoneria. The fourth factor is the propaganda movement. After 300 years of passivity under Spanish rule, The Filipino spirit reawakened when three pares or digumbursa, who is Gomez, Burgos, Zamora, were guillotined without sufficient evidence of guilt. They questioned Spanish authorities and demand reforms. The Filipino Ilustrados aimed for reforms, and so they created systematic movement, and they used a peaceful means of battling the Spanish government called the propaganda movement. So, they saw themselves as not only as inheritors of the Age of Enlightenment, but the intellectual and moral revolutionary fighting to create and define a nation and culture that was post-Enlightenment, that was no longer shuttled by the ideological and colonial restraints of the West, but a country that adopted and merged the best of Spain, United States, France, and our own unique culture and society, and support of us being a Filipino. The Kartilya can be better appreciated in its original Tagalog form because its essence was expressed using Tagalog syntax. It should also be experienced within the context of a social and political environment of that colonial era, amid local traditions, spiritual beliefs, family concepts, and ethnic diversity. That would be all.